The 3rd century BCE was a time of monumental change in the Western Mediterranean. The world was on the brink of a titanic struggle between two of its greatest powers, Rome and Carthage. For centuries, these two cities had grown in strength, each carving out its sphere of influence in the region. Yet, despite their different origins and traditions, their paths were destined to collide. The flashpoint for this collision would be the island of Sicily, a jewel in the Mediterranean, whose strategic importance could not be overstated. In this chapter, we will delve into the geopolitical landscape that set the stage for the First Punic War, exploring the rise of Rome and Carthage, their expansionist ambitions, and the factors that led to the inevitable conflict over Sicily. We have a 10-part series for you where we cover every battle of the First Punic War, so make sure you like this video, subscribe, and turn on post notifications for future videos. And now back to it. For centuries, Rome was one of many city-states on the Italian peninsula, struggling for survival in a land of fierce competition. The early Romans were not yet the masters of Italy, but they were determined to carve out their place in the world. It was in the 5th and 4th centuries BCE that Rome began to emerge as a formidable power. The Roman Republic was founded in 509 BCE after the last king of Rome, Tarquin the Proud, was overthrown. The Republic was characterized by a system of checks and balances, with power shared between the Senate, the consuls, and the assemblies. This system, though not without its flaws, allowed Rome to expand its influence steadily. In the early 4th century BCE, Rome faced a major challenge from the Gallic tribes. The Gallic sack of Rome in 390 BCE was a wake-up call for the Romans. From that point on, they resolved to fortify their city and never let such a disaster happen again. This period marked the beginning of Rome's relentless expansion across the Italian peninsula. By 275 BCE, Rome had conquered most of Italy, defeating powerful enemies such as the Samnites and the Etruscans. The Greek colonies in southern Italy, known as Magna Graecia, also fell to Roman arms after the defeat of Pyrrhus of Epirus. Rome's expansion was driven by a combination of military prowess, strategic diplomacy, and an unyielding will to dominate. Rome's legions, composed of citizen soldiers, were the backbone of its military might. The Roman army was organized into legions, each consisting of around 4,200 infantry and 300 cavalry. The infantry was divided into 3 lines: the hastati, the principes, and the triarii, with each line representing a different level of experience and equipment. The manipular formation, which allowed for flexibility in battle, was a key innovation that contributed to Rome's success on the battlefield. By the early 3rd century BCE, Rome had established itself as the dominant power in Italy. However, this dominance brought Rome into contact with other Mediterranean powers, particularly Carthage. Carthage, in contrast to Rome's land-based power, was a maritime giant. Founded in 814 BCE by Phoenician settlers from the city of Tyre, Carthage quickly grew into a thriving city-state on the coast of North Africa. The Carthaginians, known to the Romans as the Punici, were skilled sailors and traders, controlling a vast commercial empire that spanned the Western Mediterranean. Carthage's wealth came from its extensive trade networks, which stretched from the Iberian Peninsula to the shores of the Levant. The city was strategically located near the Straits of Gibraltar, allowing it to control access to the Atlantic and Mediterranean trade routes. Carthaginian merchants traded in a variety of goods, including silver, tin, ivory, and slaves. The Carthaginian navy was the most powerful in the Mediterranean, boasting hundreds of warships. The standard warship was the quinquereme, a large galley with 5 rows of oars. These ships were designed for ramming enemy vessels, a tactic that the Carthaginians had perfected over centuries of warfare. The Carthaginian navy not only protected its trade routes, but also projected power across the Mediterranean, allowing Carthage to establish colonies and client states. Carthage's political system, like Rome's, was a republic. The city was ruled by 2 annually elected magistrates known as suffetes, alongside a senate and a council of elders. However, unlike Rome, Carthage relied heavily on mercenaries to fight its wars. Carthaginian citizens rarely served in the military, with the exception of the navy. Instead, Carthage hired soldiers from various regions, including Numidia, Iberia, and Gaul. These mercenaries were effective but often lacked loyalty to the Carthaginian state. By the early 3rd century BCE, Carthage had established itself as the dominant power in the Western Mediterranean. Its empire included territories in North Africa, southern Spain, Corsica, Sardinia, and western Sicily. Carthage had fought several wars against the Greek city-states of Sicily, particularly Syracuse, but had managed to maintain its hold on the island's western regions. Sicily, the largest island in the Mediterranean, was the jewel that both Rome and Carthage desired. The island's fertile lands, strategic harbors, and central location made it a highly coveted prize. Sicily was a melting pot of cultures, with Greek, Phoenician, and native Sicilian influences. The island had long been a battleground for various powers. Greek colonists had settled on the eastern and southern coasts of Sicily in the 8th century BCE, founding cities such as Syracuse, Agrigentum, and Gela. These cities often fought among themselves but also faced external threats from the Phoenicians, and later the Carthaginians, who controlled the western part of the island. By the early 3rd century BCE, Sicily was divided into 3 spheres of influence. The eastern part of the island was dominated by the Greek city-state of Syracuse, led by King Hero II. The central and southern regions were controlled by smaller Greek and Sicilian cities, many of which were allied with Syracuse. The western part of the island, including important cities like Lilybaeum and Panormus, or modern Palermo, was under Carthaginian control. For Rome, control of Sicily was seen as a natural extension of its dominance in Italy. The island's proximity to the Italian mainland made it a potential threat if it fell into the hands of a rival power. For Carthage, Sicily was a vital part of its empire, serving as a base for its navy and a gateway to further expansion in the Mediterranean. The spark that would ignite the First Punic War came from a relatively small and obscure group known as the Mamertines. The Mamertines were Italian mercenaries, originally from Campania, who had served under the tyrant Agathocles of Syracuse. After Agathocles' death in 289 BCE, the Mamertines found themselves without employment and decided to seize the city of Messana on the northeastern tip of Sicily. The Mamertines massacred the inhabitants of Messana and established themselves as the rulers of the city. From their new base, they launched raids across northeastern Sicily, becoming a thorn in the side of the nearby Greek cities, particularly Syracuse. For years, the Mamertines managed to maintain their control over Messana, but by the 260s BCE, their situation became precarious. In 265 BCE, King Hero II of Syracuse decided to put an end to the Mamertine threat. He led an army against Messana and defeated the Mamertines in battle. Desperate for help, the Mamertines made a fateful decision. They appealed to both Rome and Carthage for assistance. For Carthage, the situation presented an opportunity to strengthen its hold on Sicily. Carthage had long viewed Syracuse as a rival, and controlling Messana would give them a strategic foothold on the northeastern part of the island. The Carthaginians quickly sent a garrison to Messana to support the Mamertines. Meanwhile, in Rome, the Senate was deeply divided over whether to intervene. On one hand, the Mamertines were mercenaries who had seized Messana through treachery, much like a Roman garrison had done at Rhegium years earlier. The Romans had executed their treacherous soldiers at Rhegium and were hesitant to support a similar group in Messana. On the other hand, there were strategic considerations. If Rome did not intervene, Carthage would likely gain control of Messana, placing a powerful enemy at the very doorstep of Italy. The debate in the Senate was fierce, but ultimately, the fear of Carthaginian expansion outweighed moral objections. The Romans decided to intervene, and a force was dispatched to Sicily under the command of the consul Appius Claudius Caudex. The Roman intervention in Messana was the first direct clash between Rome and Carthage. When the Roman forces arrived in Sicily, they found that a Carthaginian garrison was already in control of Messana. The Mamertines, who had initially invited the Carthaginians, now feared that they would lose control of the city. They expelled the Carthaginian garrison and welcomed the Romans. This move infuriated the Carthaginians, who saw it as a betrayal. Carthage had invested resources in aiding the Mamertines, only to be turned away in favor of Rome. The Carthaginians sent a fleet to blockade Messana, while the Syracusans, seeing an opportunity to crush the Mamertines once and for all, joined forces with Carthage. The Roman consul Appius Claudius Caudex found himself in a precarious position. His forces were outnumbered and surrounded by enemies on both land and sea. Despite the odds, he decided to take the offensive. Claudius led his troops in a surprise attack on the Syracusan camp, defeating Hero's forces and forcing him to retreat. With the Syracusans out of the way, Claudius then turned his attention to the Carthaginians. In a daring assault, the Romans broke through the Carthaginian blockade and forced them to withdraw. This audacious move not only secured Messana for Rome, but also marked the beginning of open hostilities between the two great powers. Rome's intervention in Messana had escalated what was initially a local conflict into a full-scale war. The Romans, emboldened by their success, saw an opportunity to expand their influence in Sicily, while Carthage was determined to defend its territories and maintain its dominance in the western Mediterranean. The stage was now set for a protracted and brutal struggle that would span over 2 decades and reshape the balance of power in the Mediterranean world. The seeds of the First Punic War were sown long before the first battle was fought. The rise of Rome as a land-based power and Carthage as a maritime empire set the two on a collision course. Sicily, with its strategic importance and rich resources, was the flashpoint that brought these two giants into conflict. The situation in Messana, involving the Mamertines, Carthage, and Rome, was the spark that ignited the war. What began as a local dispute quickly escalated into a struggle for control of Sicily and, by extension, dominance in the Western Mediterranean. The First Punic War was not merely a contest of arms, but a clash of civilizations. Rome's disciplined legions versus Carthage's powerful navy, Roman republicanism against Carthaginian oligarchy, and two vastly different cultures vying for supremacy. In the next chapter, we will delve into the early campaigns of the war, examining the initial battles and strategies employed by both sides. We will see how Rome, a land power, adapted to naval warfare, and how Carthage, a maritime giant, sought to defend its empire against an increasingly aggressive Rome. The First Punic War was only just beginning, and the battles to come would test the resolve and capabilities of both empires in ways they had never before experienced.